Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to start off with the opening presentation for the day, which is the selection of the preferred corridor for the Northern Road Link project. We're going to walk you through the process that we went through for this. It's quite involved, gets quite technical as well, too. So we'll get started on this, and then after this, we'll have a Q&A session, and then we'll roll right into our next presentation after that on building in the peatlands. So what we're talking about here is when we use the term corridor, we're talking about a 2-kilometer wide area, not the exact position of the road. So that's just to make that clear. This was a process that was involves a number of steps. Some of them get quite technical. The first step is more of a qualitative approach to looking at the corridor options, and that is what we call a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, where we look at the good and bad things, the advantages and disadvantages of each potential option. So it's a very sort of subjective sort of approach to the selection of the preferred corridor. And then after that, what we do is we identify options to move forward into the next stage of the process of identifying a preferred corridor. Then after that, what we do is we look at what would be the input layers, what should be the input layers into the model that we use to evaluate each of the corridor options. And then after that, we undertake what's called multi-criteria analysis, where we're looking at the different layers and we run them through computer software. And this is sort of an iterative back and forth process resulting in basically a series of tables of numbers that indicate and allow us to sort of measurably identify a preferred corridor option. And then finally, what we do is we take it back to communities, to the general public, to stakeholders, and get their final comments on it. So that's the sort of an overview of the process. And I'm going to now walk you through the SWOT analysis, just in terms of how things evolved over time. We started with, in 2021, with 2 corridors, the existing corridor west and the existing corridor east. Then in 2024, we had additional corridors that were requested by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, or IAC, and these were related to caribou concerns. And we identified these as West 1 corridor and West 2 corridor. Then in 2025, our SWOT analysis that we undertook again concluded that the existing corridor west was the most favorable one. So we took that forward with the existing corridor east, and then those went into the detailed analysis, the multi-criteria analysis. And this next slide looks a bit complicated, but what it really is the process of identifying the corridor options spatially. So from the start to the end of the road, in certain areas where there would be road segments, there are different directions that could be gone down. So it creates a number of different options. In this case, we ended up with a number of options, which makes the process of evaluating them very time-consuming, and as a result, using the software that we did in this case, that helps speed things up because you're grinding through a lot of data, a lot of different layers. These are layers that have been compiled previously by and we acquire them as other data sources, or layers that we create as a result of our fieldwork and the synthesis of the data obtained from our fieldwork. So we have these 3 terms that we use for our inputs, and the terms are factors, criteria, and indicators. These are determined typically through consultation with community members, with the general public, with stakeholders. They're often prescribed to a degree by the regulatory bodies. Our technical staff undertaking the studies will identify them as well too. And so these typically end up in what's called the terms of reference of the environmental assessment, or on the federal side, the tailored impact statement guidelines, or TISG. So that's sort of the recipe that we go forward with when we conduct the EA and impact assessment. And then we go through into that multi-criteria analysis, use the software. Those of you who are familiar with geographic information systems, this is the sort of the platform that we do this work through. Typically, it's the base software with a module that's focused on doing these overlays. So imagine you have the same geographic area for each layer overlaid on top of each other, and then the computer looks through those different layers and tallies up the scores, and I'll get into that. We'll get into that in a minute. So that's basically how the process works. So I've used these terms: factors, criteria, and indicators. So what exactly do these mean? Well, let's try and simplify things a little bit for you. When we talk about factors, we're talking about sort of a general category. So to give you an example, if we look at the biological environment, general category, a lot of things fall under biological environment. And so within that, we have criteria. So associated with each factor, we have criteria. In this case, for biological environment, as an example, we could have caribou, we could have wolverine, we could have bats, fish and fish habitat, and wetlands. And then for each criteria, or each criterion, we have what are called indicators. Indicators are ways of measuring, providing measures for each criteria. So they comprise the main layers that are used in this overlay process that we go through, this multi-criteria modeling process that we go through to identify a preferred corridor. And with that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Ange Brooks, who's going to talk a little bit more, start off by talking a little bit more about these indicators and data sets.
Hi, good morning. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit in more detail about indicators. This slide right here is showing the Attawapiskat River crossing. You can see that we have our west and our east options. And what the map on the left is showing, one of the model inputs, for example, is area of water bodies crossed. So we just take the exact area of how much of a river or stream is crossed, and we plop that data into the model. And then the map on the right is showing the provincial park boundary. And same idea, we use number of hectares of park crossed. So how the model itself works is takes the factors, the 5 factors that we have, and we apply a weight to them. After consultation with the communities of Webequie and Martin Falls, we decided as a team, including the communities, that we would weight all of the factors equally. Just meaning that none of the factors was considered more important than the others. They were all equally important. And then within the factors, we have the indicators, which are in the red box below, and you can see how we score them. So some of these are scored a little bit higher than others, which just means that there is more importance put on some of the indicators. For example, under the physical environment, the area of water bodies was considered more important than, areas of upland forests that provide carbon sequestration. It was just a decision that was made in consultation with the team and the communities. So there is limitation to the model. It's only as good as the data that we put into it. We've had multiple runs of the model as we get more data. We pretty much have all of our baseline field work done at this point, and we keep getting data coming from the field teams that we can put into the model, which is why we keep rerunning it, because the more data you have, the better the results are, the more accurate that they are. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of what's not in the model. There could be some information that's not spatial data, meaning that there isn't a number attributed to it, whether it's square meters or hectares or a length. So we can't put that kind of information in. One of the indicators that I usually bring up in this presentation that we had to kind of use as pooled data was Indigenous values, because there was just so much information that we didn't want to share, the communities didn't want us to share details about, so we just kind of lumped it as Indigenous values. So it's all sorts of different things, from sacred sites, berry picking areas, burial locations. I don't know what else would be in there. Hunting areas, fishing areas, that type of information. So the next two slides are just tables showing the numerical values of for the factor weight. So we have the factors on the left-hand column, and then the factor weight's 20%, and then you can see all the criteria, and the criteria weighting applied is just divided by the number of criteria that we have. So for Indigenous land use and interest, we only have 3 criteria, so it was divided equally. They're each worth 33%, and so on for all of them. The next slide is just showing the biological environment. There are far more criteria under that factor, and because of that, each factor was given a criteria weight of 5.26%. And then the next column over is the factor weight and the criteria weighting. And you can see here that it was just collectively decided that each indicator, each criteria was no more important than the other, so they were all assigned the same weighting. Except if you look further down into there, you can see that chimney swift and whippoorwill were given 0% weight. And that's because they're just not in our study area. So there was no point in assigning a weight to them. Okay, so the results of the model come out in a heat map. The one on the left shows the entire corridor alignment. And if you look over on the maps on the right, there's the Group A, which is the little 2 options up at the north end, and then the Group B options clustered around the Attawapiskat. And basically, the darker the green, the more preferred the area is, and then the darker then you go into the yellows and the darker oranges and reds, and those are the less preferred. So you can, on that map under Group B, you can kind of see that on the left-hand side options. You can see that there's far more dark green compared to the easterly option. So already that westerly option is looking like it's more preferred. And this is a tabular format of how the results come out, all the numerical values. Again, this is looking strictly at the two options at the north end of our corridor. And you can see that option F1 on the left side is mostly red. So that's considered least preferred than F2, which has significantly more green. All right, so still looking at corridors, the options at the north, F1 and F2. This just gives a little bit more detail of what the modeling output looks like. So the map on the left, I know you can't read that, but that's nesting area for migratory birds. That's probably species at risk, most likely lesser yellowlegs. The middle map is showing the yellow are historic trails, and then the one on the right is what I spoke about early, Indigenous values. So you can see that the corridor option F1 on the left has far more area of Indigenous values, which are areas that we would like to avoid. So that's why that came out in the previous slide as less preferred. And then these are the results for the Group B options, which are the ones clustered around the river. Simply looking at the colors, you can see that option 3 is far more preferred than, for example, option 5, which is clocking in as mostly red, which is least preferred. The little maps at the bottom show you all the different corridor options. So we have option 3, 4, 5 through 8 on the bottom. Okay, this is just a map, a blown up image of the Attawapskat River crossing. This would be the west crossing. And what we wanted to highlight here is that in response to concerns we had from Martin Falls community, they asked us to, a couple of times, if we could move the location of our corridor further away from some sensitive habitat areas that were located a little bit further upstream, like towards the left on the river. So we shifted it in response to community concerns. And we did this a few times on both the east and the westerly crossing options. And this final slide for me shows what our actual preferred corridor outcome looks like. It's the colorized version, and you can see that option B around the Attawapskat River, the westerly crossing came out as more preferred than the easterly crossing, and up at the north end, option F2 on the right came out as more preferred than F1. And if anybody's interested why we had these two options at the top, is because there's a bald eagle nest in the center of those two, so we had to avoid that. And that's it for me, and I will pass you over to Michelle.
Shimegwech and Anibuzu. My name is Michelle Nasir. I'm with Dillon Consulting, and we are part of the team that's looking at the Aboriginal and/or tree rights and interest assessment as part of the environmental assessment for the proposed Northern Road Link project. So for this project, as part of our Aboriginal and/or tree rights and interest assessment, we took an innovative new approach guided by what Martin Falls and Webequie First Nations wanted us to undertake as part of their processes. So they have a 3-tiered approach for Webequie First Nation, and then we have the elders guiding principles for Martin Falls. So based on that, we launched what we call the Indigenous Knowledge Program. This program was launched in 2022, March 2022 to be specific. And the idea behind this program is that through collaboration with communities, with their ability and interest in sharing their information, we can undertake assessment on Aboriginal and tree rights and interests and how they're potentially impacted by the proposed Northern Road Link project. For the Indigenous Knowledge Program, there's 2 main ways that we're hoping to get information, that we were hoping that communities would share information with us. The first way, and usually this is easier to undertake for communities, is looking at the existing knowledge base. So that would be, existing Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous land use, land and resource use information that they've collected either for previous other projects, especially projects in the area, or for their own activities resulting from, if they've taken part in the Far North Act's community-based land use planning or their own community land use planning initiatives. So we're hoping that that kind of information is something that communities would be willing to share with us. The other aspect of the existing knowledge base is also research that we undertake, so literature review, looking at what's available publicly. So that's the desktop information that we look at as part of our Aboriginal land or tree rights and interests work, and through the Indigenous Knowledge Program. What we're hoping to achieve from the second space, which is the project-specific studies, is hoping that communities would share information based on, through our Indigenous Knowledge Program, through different touch points that we've had with them, and specifically information that we've shared with them. So when we launched our Indigenous Knowledge Program, as part of that launch, we had also reached out with communities on what we call an Indigenous Knowledge Guidance document, an idea of the kind of information that we're hoping that they can share with us. That is what we're hoping could be the basis of their project-specific Indigenous knowledge study that the communities would undertake. The other aspect, and what we're seeing specifically with Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation, is participation in the field programs. So community members coming out and participating in those also generates information that's shared and a collaborative effort that continues the work that we undertake. All this to say that the basis of our Indigenous Knowledge Program is to build our baseline condition setting. So what we also call our existing condition setting, recognizing what values are important to the communities, how they are contained within our project study areas, and what that means for the assessment that we undertake on the proposed Northern Road Link project. So as I spoke to our Indigenous Knowledge Program, we do have a overall timeline for this program. As I mentioned, we did start in March 2022, and we are hoping to wrap up similarly along with the overall Northern Road Link schedule. We have a more detailed poster back there that shows this timeline. And essentially what we're hoping to do is that, because this is a critical information base on which we undertake our environmental assessment, that there are touch points where communities can reach out to us, can collaborate with us and work with us to see that their information is interwoven throughout the process. So as part of this work that we're undertaking, the idea is that it's not just the Aboriginal and Treaty Rights and Interests assessment. It's overall, we have a couple of categories here for disciplines that utilize or are hoping to interweave and braid Indigenous knowledge throughout their value components. For Aboriginal and Treaty Rights and Interests, we have two main value components, and they're in purple up there. One is the Indigenous use of lands and resources, which we call ILRU, and the other is cultural continuity and well-being. Back there on one of our poster boards, we also have a full list of indicators for both of those value components and the kind of information that we utilize in our assessment process on Aboriginal and or Treaty Rights and Interests. The idea being that our Indigenous knowledge and information that communities share is primarily used for Aboriginal and Treaty Rights and Interests, but also used throughout the entire environmental assessment and specifically for the other value components that are listed up here. So to undertake our environmental assessment process specifically as it relates to Aboriginal and tree rights and interests, what we have is a three-stage process. This process starts with stage one, where we develop an understanding of Aboriginal and tree rights and interests that are asserted within the project's study areas. This is both done through our Indigenous knowledge program and through consultation engagement with communities to understand what that looks like. Then it leads to stage two, where we understand, where we continue our understanding, on rights and interests that are within the proposed project study areas. And this helps us guide in future discussions with communities and understanding how they may be potentially be impacted by the proposed northern road link project. And then finally, what we're hoping to do with communities is undertake stage three, which is together we can work with them to find ways to reduce, mitigate, avoid potential project-related impacts while enhancing positive effects that support their Aboriginal and tree rights or interests within the project-specific project study areas. I mentioned the project study areas, and you can see that back on the map there as well. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about what those look like and what they mean for our assessment work. So we have two boundaries outlined here. One obviously is the colorful version that you see, the main, which is the corridor, the 2-kilometer corridor within which the proposed Northern Road Link project will be located. The main boundary that we look at for our Aboriginal and/or tree rights and interests assessment is the one in teal/blue, which is the what we're looking at for 22 communities in terms of their asserted rights within that area and what the direct impacts of the project may potentially be on their rights and interests. In yellow, we have our regional study area, so different from our local study area, which is in blue. The regional study area in yellow is looking at indirect effects of the project. It's looking also at project effects that are residual effects that are in combination with others to address cumulative effects as well. So those are our two boundaries that we have for our Aboriginal and/or tree rights and interests work, and they are on the map back there as well. And please feel free to reach out and we can walk you through that process. Chimagwech.
Thanks, Michelle. And in terms of where we're going next with the project, now that we've identified a preferred corridor, we are taking it to the people, community members, the public, and stakeholders to get any final comments they may have. And then once we finalize that corridor, that preferred corridor, we're going to move forward for the final year and a half of the environmental assessment with that as our study area. So that's the path forward on this project. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions you may have. Oh, we've got a question? Okay.
I missed the first part, but I was just wondering, is there a budgeted number or an anticipation of where you're going to come in if everything was done in the right timeline going forward? When would it start? When would it end? And what would it cost?
Construction costs you're talking about, right? Yeah. I don't believe we have a firm figure yet. I don't even want to go there. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, you know, you're the hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, that's as accurate as I can do it from this perspective. But it hasn't. Yeah, that hasn't been actually finalized yet. You know, we're focused just on identifying where to put it based on all the different interests and factors. Yeah. Sorry, I can't give you more details on that. Yes.
What kind of minerals will be mined there, and what's the impact, especially on the water? Because I come from Cobalt, and all the lakes are polluted there except for one because they need it, their drinking water.
Yeah, that I wish I could comment on that, but our focus is just on the project, on the roads. I'm not on the mining side. That's a separate project. So this is a public infrastructure project to build the roads to access the Ring of Fire area. And then the mining companies themselves.
You don't know what kind of minerals are there?
Well, I mean, there's chromite, there's nickel. There's been talk of other minerals being there, critical minerals. But it's not my expertise, right? So I can't really comment on that any further. I mean, it's. Yes, yeah, definitely. They'll know for sure. Yeah, they can tell you for sure. Yeah. Oh, more questions? Okay, can we, someone take a microphone out to?
Pretty loud, but maybe just piggybacking on the first
Yep.
question, but more to your presentation here. So the aspect that was technical, I noticed that was one of the factors in consideration.
Yep.
I guess what, apologies if I missed.
What's included in technical? Yeah.
I'm curious if that is like, oh, this way is $50 million, this way is $100 million.
Yeah, I mean, we have a team that's a terrain analysis team. This is probably the bulk of that technical category, and they basically are a group of geologists and engineers, and they serve a couple of roles on our project. They help identify aggregate sources for the project, because obviously you need to find those, but they also look at the terrain, and they have experience working on projects and helping route linear infrastructure based on terrain types. So what they'll do is they will map the terrain at the onset of the project, and then that's a layer that's factored in. They do have a general number that they associate, per kilometer, I think, for different terrain types, and that's where we get sort of an approximate number for construction costs. So that's the main factor. Slope, things like that, soils. If there's landforms like eskers, right, elevated areas, that's always preferred from an engineering point of view, but it's not always preferred from a biological point of view. And community members, in many cases don't like the eskers being used for purposes like that because the wildlife use those corridors, right? So those are some of the examples. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Can someone? Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm going to get you to speak into the microphone so everyone can hear.
It's interesting that you're talking about engaging First Nations people and the impact of the project on them. There's obviously planning that went on before Bill 5 came into effect. So what I'm trying to get at is you're going to impact on the First Nations there, on their hunting and fishing and trapping and gathering activity, like I've seen by your map there, and you note where the First Nations are, but their trap lines are much bigger than just the boundaries of the reserves. So how are you going to skirt around that? You're going to go right through their trap lines, and you're going to dig up critical minerals there, so I want to know how you're going to do that without harming the trap line, because they do trap beaver, marten, fisher, wolverine, or whatever they trap over there. You're going to impact that by creating this corridor. How are you going to go do that? I'm just interested in how you're going to do that.
Chimagwech, thank you for sharing that. We are working with communities or hoping to work with communities through the Indigenous Knowledge Program. We have poster boards back there as well showing not only the communities that we're interacting with and hoping to interact with, but also how we are hoping to interact with them. So that is a good point, and that is something we are considering. So even in the alternatives assessment where that information is available, we are considering that. But we haven't had a lot of uptake from communities, and a lot of that information is confidential. So we are working with communities to understand what data they want to share, how they want to share it, and how they want it utilized for that work. So, Chimagwech.
And just to add to that, we've been reaching out, we've been on this project for 6 years now. So there are 22 Indigenous communities that we are engaging with, because the province and the federal government tell us who we are to consult with. And so we've been doing that for the last 6 years and using approaches that are different from those used before, trying to use sort of different ways, whether it's live streams or radio shows, and more using the website as a resource, major resource. So we're trying to reach out. As Michelle said, the problem is sometimes getting the feedback that we would like. So we're always soliciting more meetings with communities, whether they're in person or virtually, to try to get as much information and input from them as we can. Yes. Can someone, microphone? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So I have two technical questions. Sorry if I misunderstood your method. So the first one is about the weighting of criteria. Imagine that we have two factors, factor A and factor B. Factor A has just 2 criteria, and factor B has 4 criteria. So when we assign a same weight to each criterion, then we are actually penalizing the criteria that are in the factors that with more criteria. For example, so because at the end of the day, when you overlay all the layers together, these are based on the weight that assigned to different criteria. So when you assign the same weight, the group that has 4 criteria will automatically, there is no, anyway, they will receive less weight than the other one. So that I think that's something that can cause bias, in the analysis. And again, I'm sorry if I misunderstood your method. And the second one is that, instead of moving routes left and right to find the better route or alternative routes, can I ask why didn't you use, route selection methods like, least cost path analysis when what you already did, so you have a suitability, for example, for route by overlaying all of these different criteria. And you can use, route selection process, which, minimizes environmental impact. So it just uses, where the impacts are less, and then connects, the point A to point B with the least possible impact on the environment, considering even other criteria beyond the environment. For example, design, you mentioned that you have a trained, team that, worked on the train aspect. You can add also those criteria as a constraint or as a, different criteria into your analysis. Yeah, thank you so much.
I'll answer the second part. This is a least cost path assessment, essentially, right? I'm a GIS person from the past, and that's essentially what this is. So those layers you're talking about are factored in. The terrain layers are factored into the process. So we do that as part of this work. The weighting question, I'll pass that to you, Ange.
I'll flip back to that slide. I think the one you're talking about. One of these ones, where I said the Indigenous land use and interest only has 3 criteria. That's what you're talking about. And then in the biological environment, because we have a lot more criteria, so there's less weight. I don't know how to explain it. From how I understand it, the factors with more criteria versus the ones that have less criteria, they still end up being measured the same. I don't know how else to explain it, because this isn't my forte, this part of the modeling exercise. The person who has the expertise in that couldn't make it to this event. I don't know how else to, maybe you can explain it.
Actually, there are methods that you can use instead of assigning the same weight to each criteria. There are methods like analytical hierarchical process, AHP, for TOPSIS. So you mentioned that you have 22 communities related to this project. You can ask each community to fill out the tables, and then this method aggregates all the weightings together and give you one final weight for each criterion, based on overall agreements that without the fourth man. So I think this method, assigning the same weight, causes some biases. I'm not saying that it's
Yeah, I wish the person who actually worked on this modeling was able to make it, but they unfortunately were not. So I don't really know how to answer your question properly.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I just want to say, add one response as well, is that what you're speaking to is reaching out to the communities and getting their feedback on this for the weighting. As Ange spoke to it earlier, and then Don spoke to it earlier, this weighting was decided with the First Nations of Martin Falls and Webakwe, who are the proponent communities. Outreach to the other 21 communities is still ongoing. So there is an opportunity to play around with these numbers a little bit once we get those kind of responses back from them. We haven't received those responses yet. So that's something we're working through. And where we have received that information, a lot of it is worked through. And when Ange was showcasing more information about like certain Indigenous land use, that has been factored into that. But I understand what you're speaking to, and then hierarchy of needs as well, that kind of overlook of it is something that we consider. It just isn't always shown in what we're presenting today. So.
And I think the thing to remember is what we're doing is identifying a preferred corridor, right? So it's 2 kilometers wide. And then within that the actual position of the road can move within that corridor. So it's the best way to, the way I like to describe this process is you're seeing the science part of it, but there's also an art to it, right? Which is where we sit down with community members and they provide input. And, and we've been getting input, right up until, just a few days ago. And we'll continue to probably get input. As we move forward with a preferred corridor, that line, where that corridor, the corridor won't move, but the actual position of the road will definitely move, based on other information we may get from community members or others. More likely from community members, because we're going to take our mapping to another level so they can look at where we're sort of envisioning the road should be, and then they may say, no, not there, it needs to be over here. And then we make those adjustments. And then even when we get down to detailed design, there's more micro level adjustments based on the landscape, right? So, I mean, this is sort of a higher level sort of search, but it gives us a corridor and an area to focus on, so. We could talk more afterwards, though, if you like, for sure, absolutely. Any other questions? Oh, another question over there. You have that microphone. Oh, great.
I have two questions.
Sure.
One, I'm curious about what you guys do in terms of community engagement. I know you mentioned like the online stuff, but what is done more to reach out to like older communities?
Oh, the different forms of community engagement?
And then also
Sure.
my second question is, is Indigenous businesses going to be a priority to future roads, or
Absolutely. That's an absolute yes. Yeah, it's to maximize opportunities on the procurement side. If it was possible, if at all possible, I mean, that's part of going forward. That's part of it being an Indigenous-led project. Martin Falls and Webequie going forward. The objective is to maximize their involvement, whether it's through employment or procurement, as much as possible. For sure. Now, in terms of engage or consultation and the different methods, we've done, of course, typical community meetings. We've done focus groups. So we've sat down with smaller groups within the community, elders, like to get a cross section. So women and elders and people of different age groups, other age groups as well. And that's, some of that is prescribed as part of the federal process. To do that, but I mean, it's just good practice to get that cross-section of feedback. So we've done a whole number of other things. I mean, we've done in-person, we've done virtual meetings, we've done live streams on various topics to help break down the EA process to a level that community members can follow, because it's quite intimidating. And once community members get a better idea of what's involved in it, they realize that it is very comprehensive. Now, does it completely respect their worldview? No, it doesn't. But that's where we reach out to them to try to get them to provide their worldview to the process. So, it takes time. We've noticed over the years, because we have been doing this for a while, a significant increase in the complexity of the questions we get, when we do presentations, which indicates that community members are understanding the process, and so they're able to ask a lot of really good questions, which is great. So we've done other things with these live streams, as I said, focusing on topics. We also do radio shows on an occasional basis on Wawate Radio Network, which is a radio network which includes, I think, 40 plus First Nations. And yeah, Moose Creek's part of that. Yeah. So we do these shows, fairly regularly, and the idea of them is to inform and entertain at the same way we do, play music at the same time. It's to try to reach people in a different way, in an innovative way, to make them feel relaxed and good and ask questions, don't feel intimidated about asking questions about the process. So we feel it's helped. I mean, it's a start, but we need to get better at that. So. Anyone else? Okay.
How did you decide on equal factor weighting, like the 20% thing?
I believe that was the consensus of the two communities, I think, that were.
Well, what did they use to, maybe that's too specific, but like how did they come to that conclusion? Just because it seems unusual that everything would be exactly equal, right? When I'm sure in general in life that's not true.
Well, I mean, I think we presented that as an option to them, right? Like, yeah, and I think, in considering the various options, without us trying to sort of guide the process, that was sort of the feedback that I think we got from them, from the meetings that I would sit in on, for sure. I don't think, is there anything else, Ange, that you can add to that, or?
No, that was it. It was just a general consensus. They couldn't really decide. They couldn't decide which would be more important than another, and then just in the end decided, why don't we make them all equal?
And
This is sometimes the only option when there's no great choice. So, yeah.
And again, we're talking about the corridor too, right? It's a bigger area. It's not like a specific location. Like when we get into where the road should cross the river, you know, that's a very different conversation, right? Because then it's like, well, I know that this area wouldn't be good because this is a frequently used by moose, you know, or it's a hunting area, so avoid that, you know, because the engineers will always want to find the narrowest spot to cross the river, right? And but that could be a spawning area, so that those conversations get a lot more focused, for sure.
Well, on the right of ways and everything.
Yes.
Any of that space.
Yep.
Yep. No,
Yep. Absolutely.
Speaking of right-of-ways, how wide will the right-of-way be?
I believe this one is 60 meters?
60 meters, 60, so the right-of-way will be 100 meters wide with a cleared area of 60 meters.
Got a question in the back there. Don't know if we can, sure.
What is your total length of road? I know it's gonna meander a bit, the 2-kilometer corridor, but what's the approximate length?
I think it is with the preferred option
161 kilometers.
161, yeah. Any other questions?
I know
Yes.
some answers.
There are two criterion with the weight, overall weight of 0. So on the top it says the weight calculated based on factor weight times criteria weight. So when it's 0, it means that one of those should be 0, but here none of them is 0. So they also should be 1 to 1 1, I guess, but they are 0 here. No?
I think we said those birds weren't found in the study.
But then they should receive a higher weight, not less weight.
Well, if they're not there at all, how would you?
So they should be.
Yeah, MECP asked us to include them. They gave us a list of species at risk that we had to include in our analysis, but those two specific bird species range doesn't even extend that far north.
Yes.
So basically, we're still talking like at least 2 years out before
Yeah.
anything, before even that road bed or anything's even
Yeah.
corridor decided, but
Yeah, 2 years until the environmental assessment is complete. Until we have it complete, and then it still has to go in for review.
And then once that's done, and if it's approved, then, which could take, let's say, well, things have sped up a little bit now, so we're looking at, you know, approval process,
I
maybe
don't
3
know.
or 4 months, maybe, because things are really getting accelerated. And then, you know, then there's a detailed design phase, right? There could be early works, but it's really getting the permits in line and the detailed design phase. And then, you know, drawings issued for construction, and then, so yeah, it's still a ways away, for sure.
have some of the aggregate sources been identified?
They have been, yes, yeah. So that's part of the process that we've gone through. That firm I was mentioning to you that does the terrain analysis comes up with sort of approximate volumes for different areas that they've done drilling in. And so, yeah, and it's all about, you know, of course, there's other factors, proximity to where the road might end up being, and how big the deposits are. Will those deposits serve the project in terms of construction and operations, or will we need multiple aggregate sites? You know, so many different factors, right? Things to think about as well. Any more questions? Yeah.
Aside from the roadway that's going to be going through the corridor, is there any other infrastructure that's being considered within that corridor? And is that a part of the cumulative, I guess, assessment of the corridor's ability to house all that infrastructure? And I think even beyond, outside of the initial corridor, is there like a phased approach for future infrastructure as well? Transmission, rail, perhaps?
So I've heard discussions have occurred about maybe transmission lines going through the same corridor, but nothing final. I believe, were they looked at in the cumulative effects as a possibility? They probably were. So
Yeah.
when we look at cumulative effects, we probably looked at that as a distinct possibility, given it's a cleared area, right, that could still accommodate them. So, but they weren't part of our environmental assessment. They would have to be part of another separate class environmental assessment for transmission lines, for example. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, just one more. With respect to the field work underway, this is a Class EA that you're following?
No,
right
this
now?
is a full, this is
a
an
full-
individual EA, so it's
Okay.
a full, yeah.
Have you had the opportunity to put in place any monitoring agreements with some of the First Nations to have community members in the field to participate in this work?
Community members have worked with us in this, and you know, we're always soliciting their help to help us with the field work. Absolutely. You know, we've had mixed success in recruiting community members to help us, but you know, we've had some success at that. Now, in terms of when the EA is complete and some of the commitments that are part of approvals, you know, there will be some long-term monitoring programs that we've already identified as technical specialists, but the province will also. And, you know, the expectation is community members lead those, right? And which is, because they are stewards of their land, right?
Yeah, there's definitely some opportunity to leverage that capacity from a monitoring perspective, pre-construction, but during construction and following construction.
Yes.
Archaeological monitoring, environmental monitoring, right across the board to build that capacity. It's definitely worth the investment for the communities and the proponents involved.
Absolutely, and you know, it's an opportunity for skills development, training, so that, you know, that's all part of what I was talking about before, maximizing the opportunities for the communities in the region, right? Whether it's procurement, whether it's employment, and in terms of employment, it could take a lot of different forms, whether it's in construction, whether it's doing environmental monitoring, right? Lots of different things, long-term monitoring, regional monitoring. There's a lot of opportunities there for sure.
Should, like, there'll be continuous hurdles, obviously, of a project this size. Is there any, like, actual barriers at this point, like non-starter at this point, or even maybe a bit of a loaded question, I'll apologize, but you mentioned like consultations ongoing. In some cases, many communities haven't responded or responses
Yep.
aren't great. Is there, like, for lack of a better term, a break-even point on that consultation to where you can't wait anymore?
There, you know, there's definitely obstacles. There have been some communities that have chosen not to reciprocate when it comes to consultation through this process. Absolutely. Maybe some of those things will be sorted out. We don't see them being massive obstacles. I think there's certainly things that ultimately Ontario will have to work with, right? Yeah, they'll have to work with those communities and try to come to some sort of agreement with them to help make this go forward and have at least, you know, the communities giving their blessing, you know, to an extent for the project, right? Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, with that, look at it, it's 11 o'clock, perfect timing. And I hope you enjoyed it. And we're going to move now into our next presentation. Give us a couple of minutes for our host to get everything set up. If he's around, I can't see him around here. He's around here. And I think you'll enjoy this. This is talking about building in peatlands, which is can be a bit of a controversial topic, but it's an interesting one. So with that, I am going to introduce you to our, oh, there he is. He's just scrambling to get ready here. Today's speaker for this presentation is a gentleman by the name of Dan Kunstler. He works with Dillon Consulting. Dan is an expert on building roads in places that are where it's hard to build roads, peatland.
Thanks a lot, Don. Aaron, is it okay if I grab one of these ones? Okay. There we go. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Kunstler, and I apologize. I'm just recovering from some laryngitis, so hopefully eating the mic will help a little bit here. But I'm with Dillon Consulting out of Winnipeg office, and partner there for the last 9 years. Prior to that, I was 19 years with MTI, basically the MTO equivalent. And 12 of those 19 years were spent up in Thompson, Manitoba. And so the passion of building all-season roads to communities and resources is a passion of mine that's carried on. So today I'm going to just expand a little bit further. Again, background is more on the highway engineering front. And so the topic today is engineering and sovereignty in the Ring of Fire. 2 words that we can finally bring together and moving the path forward. So just a real privilege to be here today with you at the PDAC conference. So again, just for the context of where we're at, where we are in one of those promising mineral developments in over a century here in the country. And I know the last presentation there, it's definitely looking at the resources of chromite, nickel, copper, and platinum, all raw materials needed for the EV batteries and to clean steel. But focus also is access to the remote communities. And I want to focus on that a little bit throughout, weaving back and forth between the resources and the communities and what it means living there and the project. So we're roughly 500 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay, and the highlight that you see there. So again, we're moving beyond the headlines that you're seeing from the minerals and really want to look at the reality of access for both Webequie and Martin Falls First Nation. And these projects are a fundamental shift. It's more than just the road. We're looking at the 3 corridors, if you will, on the south, Martin Falls First Nation Access Road, approximately just under 190 kilometers. The Northern Road Link, correction there, it's, as Ange alluded to, closer to 160, and the Webequie Supply Road. So both Martin Falls and Webequie Supply Roads, you've recently seen in the media, the final EAISs have been submitted, and we're just, again, currently in the process of that preferred alternative for the Northern Road Link. So it's very much looking at the connection from the corridor for all elements together. Just on the schematic here, it shows the south here, the Martin Falls, and now we have the preferred alternative coming up the east side. If you can all see the pointer there. So the whole way up, it's taking the eastern alternative. I'll get into that a little bit. The Northern Road Link, again, just recently looking at that preferred alternative that the previous team just alluded to. And then up here, the Webequie Supply Road. And so this single functional corridor benefits flow both ways. Resources out, but critical supplies, healthcare access, social and economic sovereignty in. And we'll expand a little bit more on that. So one of the big things, of course, is the lay of the lands that we're in and building in the wet. And a very similar project of likeness that I'll draw a comparison to is the East Side Road Authority project in Manitoba. Roughly 10 years ago, I was involved in that. It was a 1,300 kilometer network of roads to connect 13 Indigenous communities. And it sunset with government change and politics and so forth, but 2 communities, Bloodvein and Barons River First Nation Manitoba, were connected. And the Barons River First Nation is very much on the same line of latitude, very much in the Canadian Shield and peatlands. And what we found there is we really want to float. I went one slide ahead here, apologies. Oh, something's messed up here. Sorry about that. Come back to that. We're not really building on bedrock. We are in certain areas where it's an engineer's dream, But in other areas where we're basically on organic material that's anywhere from 40 centimeters to 5 meters deep. And on the Martin Falls network, we're around 60% of this. On the Northern Road Link, I know area that I'm involved in is around 45, 50%. So very much a split here in terms of good terrain, poor terrain. Very much influenced, as we carry on with the presentation, by the feedback that we're getting from the communities and membership. So this picture here on the bottom right is taken from the east side of Lake Winnipeg, just south of Barons River, where we're building through very much the likeness of that fen. And what's very critical in the philosophy of this, that's come out loud and clear, is maintaining that hydraulic conductivity. We really don't want to disturb that groundwater movement. We want to make sure that that hydraulic conductivity, the natural flow of water, is moving back and forth. And so what we term it as, we coin it as floating versus excavating, where the floating road is essentially built on top. We thought we were, pretty wise back in the day of chasing that peat, getting down to silts, till, clays, and then building on something solid. But that just introduced water management problems. It affected our ability to maintain that hydraulic conductivity. And so we pivoted pretty quickly to rafting over top. So we clear and grub, as Ange alluded to, a 60-meter wide corridor out of the 100-meter wide right-of-way. And we'll just take it down just to the prairie, what we call the prairie, but just the natural ground. And then we'll build over top. These two are joking around a little bit. They're actually on their knees. They're making a joke. So it doesn't sink that much. But what we did learn, just from like the geotechnical studies, I'll say, when you're building on the peat fen bog areas, it'll settle 35, 40%. So let's say you have that 2-meter thick bog layer. We overcompensate and we'll overbuild, knowing that it'll settle almost a meter down. We tend to use muck, the drilled and blasted quarry material that you see there. And when you're working with a D8, D9, and the natural progression as it's working the material, the fines migrate to the top, and that coarse material settles to the bottom naturally, which is a blessing for us. So some of those lessons learned, it's not wise to chase the peat anymore. We want to use it. We want to maintain that hydraulic conductivity. And very critical, but we'll come to this about sourcing your aggregates. So that's an aerial image of the road just south of Barons River, First Nation in Manitoba. The Barons River, many of you Ontario folk will know, like the bridge project going on in Pikangikum right now. It's the same river, but it flows northwesterly and comes out quite a bit north in Manitoba into Lake Winnipeg. Oh, sorry. So this is, a 10-kilometer long fen bog area that just south here. And that very much mimics what we're finding in our MFCAR NRL areas. So key point here, when we come in, just like the science teams, there's 23 science teams, I think, when we're 23 different reports, I know that. 20,000 pages of bathroom reading for you. But we put in piezometers well before we do any advanced construction efforts. And so those piezometers are stationed throughout, and that'll pick up water quality, water quantity, and we do that during construction, post-construction. And what we found over the years, the road was open to Barons River in 2017, Bloodvein River First Nation in 2014, is that thankfully we're seeing similar results, and that water quality, water quantity is in check. We also want to limit the amount of footprint disturbance here on the lay of the land. So what you see there is basically just that, like we're sticking to as tight a corridor as we can. Shifting a bit, next few slides on the geotechnical investigations. So this is MFCAR, but very similar in terms of how we're mapping Northern Road Link as well. So again, we're chasing the eastern alternative as the preferred alternative. And just to the previous team's comments, so this is a prime area where I was batting 0 for 3 on this I joke around with Bob and Lawrence Baxter, members of the project team, where it sometimes makes engineering sense to build the road isn't from a Western science lens, isn't the desired outcome from a cultural side of things and the social side. So the yellow dots on here represent the till sands and gravels. The pink here represent the bedrock sites. So bedrock is scarce. We have, even though it's small on here, they're large sources, but they're 50 kilometers apart. So early on when we were looking at this alternative 2-3, we call it, there was a huge $300 million haul factor cost in here, just the haul factor. And so fortunately that was also a discouraged route from a social lens with all the, in future recognizing that this is not just MFCAR, but also the access to the resources. The desired was to come up the west side here. So yeah, over here I know there were questions from the previous panel here in terms of costs. We'll know costs a lot more once you look at those preferred alternatives and dive into a little bit more. We do know, like on good terrain, we're at 2 to 3 million a kilometer. On the fens, bogs, highly variable, 4 to 5 plus. Don't want to lock in any pricing because, like I say, these fens, especially in here, could be 3, 4, 5 meters deep, and because of that settlement factor, you still got to get grounded. The next is looking at the geophysics. So looking at a combination of intrusive geotechnical investigations, your standard where you have a corridor that you're looking at, you want to probe every 100, 200 meters. It's a highly costly, highly scheduled, time-sensitive program. So we want to augment that with the airborne geophysics. So the top 2 pictures are actually from the project I was involved in 10 years ago, where we cleared an exploratory trail of 12 meters wide, did some O mapping, did some GPR, ground penetrating radar, and physically picked that data up. And now instead we're looking at using airborne geophysics, where you pick up that continuous data set as well, but complementing that and looking at that with intrusive investigations to calibrate your data. So yes, we're still doing boreholes in the ground, but we're not having to do as much intrusive work to hopefully achieve the same outcomes. So that's what this slide is essentially driving at. Going to pause here and shift a little bit now in terms of to the proponent-led governance and just the uniqueness of this project, where Webequie and Martin Falls. Sorry, I have to take a sip of water here. Where the proponents are not the stakeholders. In past projects of this nature, the communities are seen as a stakeholder. Here, they're the driver, and that's really what this is getting at. And like I mentioned earlier, even though we had Western science come up with ideas in terms of where the road should go, we're really listening to understand and pivot those aspects shared to us by membership. So they hold the pen on the EAs. They determine in terms of reference, not external agencies. Often in the past, we almost always got in a bit of a discussion with the jurisdictions who favor caribou, but the communities favor moose more. So it's a bit of a give and take to understand and appreciate the nuances of the harvesters of the land. Continuing on that vein, previous presenters talked about the whole Aboriginal treaty rights and interests, the Indigenous knowledge. This slide deck basically really reinforces that two-eyed seeing, where I might see a depression, get a lot of intel out of the LiDAR. Meanwhile, I learned from the communities and from the team at the HEIK level that there's far more to it from the cultural lens. Same thing in terms of all of our baseline studies, the science teams that are in the bush, picking up aquatics, ungulates, the wildlife, And again, really understanding the lay of the land from that cultural landscape lens. Pivoting now to a bit of the economics, the cost of living. And again, we all know that there's a huge gap in terms of the freight supply chain. Currently, winter roads, thankfully, in Manitoba, they're almost all open out of full loading. I'm not sure about Northwestern Ontario at this point, but I know Martin Falls, for example, has full loading across the Albany, which is great, because those freight costs drastically increase, and your consumables, your price of fuel, your building materials, often projects, whether it's health centers, school, housing, sometimes they don't get in, and then the project's detained a year. It just has a ripple effect on schedule. Sometimes those bill of materials are needed for other emergent, urgent work. So it presents the housing crisis just continues to unravel further in that lens. So now with an all-season road, you now have a mitigated opportunity here for year-round access. Also market access, ability to export and trade year-round. I know other communities in Manitoba are all looking at micro fish plants and hatcheries and other things. It's a resource and economic framework to move both ways. So the cost of living from the lens of health and safety and reliable access. So from a healthcare lens, you now have a predictable ground access to your specialists, reduce reliance on emergency medevac flights. Encourage you to all look at NIHB, non-insured health benefit. It's an annual report that the government puts out. In Manitoba, I know we're approaching $260 million a year on medevac transport. And that's growing exponentially. 10 years ago, there was 100 million less. Not only that, but it's sad when you miss your appointments and the physicians either can't come in or you can't get out on account of canceled transport. So food security, from the lens of cheaper and more reliable access to your fresh produce, milk, consumables that are often, quite a bit more. Back in 2001, we were building a road to South Indian Lake, northwest of Thompson, north of Leaf Rapids, actually. And so I lived in Leaf Rapids. We commuted to our job site. So the price of 4 liters of milk back then was $5-6 at the co-op, and in South Indian was 13. So just because, even though it was a long ferry ride, an hour and a half, but now they have road access to their community. And of course, from a safety lens, not having to chase the early winter road opening, trying to make it out for Christmas shopping and so forth before the roads are open, and same thing in April when roads are closed. Insurance is no longer covered by, in Manitoba, it's MPI. Ontario, you guys have the private world. But yeah, always risking and extending as long as you can to get in and out. And then again, from the cost of living, the social and cultural well-being. So we're looking at reducing the isolation. These communities would now be connected. You can come and go for youth travel, sports, cultural exchanges, right? Education without expensive flights. You have that family connection now as well, facilitating those easier visits, coming and going to the urban centers, and education access. One thing that's come out with some recent interviews with Northern Manitoba communities and the students going from remote communities to, say, Brandon University or U of M, U of W in Winnipeg. It's not so much the academics, it's the isolation. In the fall, not being able to go home for a $2,000 return ticket during reading week. Christmas is suspect too, and at that point it's just, I've had enough. And so having other options would also likely facilitate a better outcome for the education programs. So finally, when we're looking at it all together, their communities are no longer at the mercy of weather for their essential supplies and connection. They gain control over their own logistics and their supply chains. Yes, we're looking at the resource development that's critical here as well. So the all-season road is necessary for the backbone for developing those resources. And we really want to look at this as active partners rather than bystanders. I know the last presentation, just in terms of community involvement, there's many different models out there to get there. On that Barons River project, we had mid-70s, 74 to 77% local Indigenous labor on equipment, on roughly 45, 50 pieces of iron. And so it was great to see. I think that's it, yeah. So in terms of just this, we're on the cusp of this generational transformation of Northwestern Ontario. Just wanted to draw attention from the engineering front that we're listening to both the Western science teams, but more importantly to our proponents, not our stakeholders, our true partners, and listening to their feedback and adjusting to that end. All right, I'll pause there. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions? All right. You left me off easy here.
Well, thanks, Dan. I'm surprised there's no questions. I guess it was so thorough. There's just no more questions to answer. So thanks for that, Dan. And thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. For the rest of the day, we'll be here. Open house format, no further presentations, but we're here. If you have questions, please drop by and or stick around, and we'll be here circulating, and we'll do our best to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.